A very good morning to all of you. We started talking about the background of the development of different critical approaches. In my yesterday lecture, I talked about Greek, two Greek critics. One is Plato and then Aristotle. So we talked about both these critics. Now we shall go ahead with the next critics. Just a minute. Well, so we came to know about Plato's views regarding literature, especially poetry. Poetry was the general term used in those days, and Plato looked at poetry merely as an imitation of the imitation. It is twice removed from the reality. His student, his disciple Aristotle also accepted it that poetry is the imitation, but he thought that it is not removed from the reality. And we also understood his views on tragedy and comedy, etc. However, you are familiar with the syllabus, and you might be knowing that in the syllabus we are going to study Aristotle's poetics, some chapters from poetics to some extent. So there we'll talk about Aristotle and his views in detail. Now we shall go ahead with the next critic, means next contributor to the development of this field of literary theory and criticism, Horace. Horace was the Roman critic. He is well known for his work Ars Poetica, which means the art of poetry. The Latin term for the art of poetry is Ars Poetica. And a personal letter, means much of his views on criticism, literature are available in this work, The Art of Poetry, and his personal letter, through which we understand his views regarding literature. In these texts, Horace, I mentioned that he was the Roman critic, aims to provide a guideline on how to be a good writer. He advises, his advice, we can say, basically includes that poets should imitate other poets, especially the poets of the past, and particularly the Greeks. So that was his opinion, that was his advice. And if you remember, the views of neoclassical critics of 18th century, they had similar views regarding literature. Follow the ancients was the view, and similar was the case of Horace. Horace thought that poets should imitate other poets, especially the poets of the past, and particularly he thought that the poets should imitate the Greeks. They should write about traditional subjects in unique ways. That was his view. And further, the poet should avoid all extremes in subject matter, diction, vocabulary, and style. Now, I suggest you to understand these views in a better manner to understand neoclassicism in English literature. Neoclassicists had similar views regarding literature. Horace was of the opinion that gaining mastery in the subject matter, diction, vocabulary, and style by reading is very important, and by following the examples of the classical Greek and Roman authors. That was his view. He further stated that poets means here writers. You should understand it. In those days, the term poetry and poet was used to mean literature and authors or writers. So he opined, he was of the view that poets should avoid appearing ridiculous, and therefore they should aim their sights low, not attempting to be a new Virgil or Homer. That was his opinion. Means they should not think that they can be Virgil or Homer. Virgil and Homer were great writers. Homer was the Greek writer. Virgil was the Roman writer. But knowing that, they were the classicists. They wrote great works. Means they're well known for their great tragedies. So Horace advises the poets not to try to be Virgil or Homer. Further, he thought that literature's ultimate aim is to be sweet and useful. He uses the term, no, Latin term, dulce et utile. Dulce means sweet, at the same time it should be useful. Literature should be sweet, means pleasing. It should please the people. It should delight the readers. At the same time, it should be useful as well. So therefore, it is the task of the poet to aim for the both in his works. A poet means the writer should write to teach at the same time to delight. To teach and delight should be the aim of any writer, any poet, any dramatist, novelist, etc. These terms are used in a later stage. Earlier they would say poet. When we talk about the main area of interest and criticism about Horace's, okay, he was interested in literary taste, namely the features that make a literary work good. So he talks about all those things. And his views have a great influence on literature. So his views on literature became the official canon of literary taste during the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and as I mentioned, during the neoclassical period as well. Whatever views, the neoclassicists were influenced by the views of Horace. Now, when we talk about the catchphrase in his writing, in his views regarding literature, the catchphrase that we should remember, as soon as you mention the name Horace, you should remember literature's ultimate aim is to teach and delight. So that is the catchphrase. Means that is how we remember Horace. Another important Roman critic that we should name here is Longinus. He lived in the first century, and he is well known for his work of criticism on the sublime. Now, what were the main concepts in his views, in his criticism? Longinus thought that one cannot accurately judge a literary work unless one is exceedingly well read. This is applicable to you people as well. Means you cannot judge a literary work, a poem, a novel, a drama unless you are well read. You are familiar with the background, with the history, with the socio-cultural, political background of that work. So one should be well read. That's what Longinus thought. Now, what is great in a work? That is sublime. The term sublime is something which is great in work. Means sublime is an aspiration for higher, for standard quality, for something more divine than we. That is what sublime is. Of high quality. Sublime is of a very great quality, of very high quality. All leaders possess the innate capacity to recognize it. That's what he felt. Every reader has this innate means inborn, natural capacity to identify the sublime. Sublime is what is great in that work. So the harmonious response of our intellects, emotions, and wills to work of art means that we have been touched by the sublime. Harmonious means together. Response of our intellect means our intellect, our emotions, and our wills means desires. All of these three elements work together when we read a work of art. And when it appeals to our intellect, our emotions, and our wishes, that is what sublime is. It touches all these elements in our mind. So the author must possess a great mind and a great soul. That's what Longinus thought. The text must be composed of dignified and elevated diction. While choosing a diction, dictions means uh, the choice of words by the writer, by the author, by the poet. And a text must dignified means of high quality, respectable. Elevated means of very great quality, of high position, we can say. Elevation, you might be knowing, elevator. So the choice of words should be of high quality, of high value, and it should, what you call, make the reader to think high. High thinking, high thought should come in the reader's mind. So the reader's reaction to work matters only if the audience, as if the audience, no, if as the audience they are learned enough. Means what? The readers must be well read, knowledgeable to understand the text. That's what Longinus thought. No, this is classical criticism. Longinus was mainly interested in single elements of a text. And when we talk about his important contribution, we need to understand that he the first literary critic to quote his writing from the different traditions than his own. Means he borrowed views from Hebrew, not only from Latin language, from Hebrew literature as well. Therefore, he deserved the title of the first comparative critic. Means he compared Latin with Hebrew. Therefore, he can be called the first comparative critic in literary history. You can also take the comparative perspective of studying literature. You can compare English poetry with Marathi poetry, Hindi poetry, Urdu poetry. So that can be a comparative work. So Longinus is credited to have been the first comparative critic in literary history, and he was the one. He was the first to define a literary classic. What is classic? He defined it. Longinus is well known for his critical method and concepts, and his critical method and concepts can be seen as foreshadowing various schools of literary criticism. Means whatever we call as new criticism, reader-oriented criticism, reader response theory, all these, the roots are in Longinus criticism, in the criticism by Longinus. Means foreshadow means something which may happen in future. And what Longinus talked in the first century is reflected in 20th century. We can understand his importance then. So this is how we understand the two critics, Horace and Longinus.